أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Dear viewers on YouTube, friends and family, welcome to another discussion on the Quran, where we highlight some verses of the Quran, where I try to use to the best of my ability my limited means in terms of the Arabic language, in terms of my own understanding, my own experience of the world, and share with you, the viewer, which we know could be anywhere in the world, could be Muslim or not Muslim or any from any background, what these verses mean to me and how these verses can contribute to improving the world, or improving at least my life. And so today's discussion will be, of course, I'm busy with a series that I call Quranic Reflections, and so it is about reading the Quran and reflecting on it. So this in this discussion, I want to continue where we left off about a few weeks ago, when we covered the first part of Surah Ali Imran, this third chapter of the Holy Quran. And in that first chapter, I presented to you a few verses from the Holy Quran, which were addressed to what in the Quran is referred to as the people of the book, but which I prefer to call the followers of the law. There were no books, bound books in common usage when the Quran was revealed, and so the word kitab, we need to look at the ancient meaning of the word kitab, which means law, or the prescribed law or code. In fact, the word code would be very close to what we would regard. So the continuation today is in the same chapter, but we will just proceed from where we ended off last time. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer you, first of all, my overall understanding of these verses. So there are about, say, 50 or so verses that I will deal with. Now, my first assumption when I read the Holy Book or the Holy Quran is that it has to have meaning. It has to have a very clear, coherent message. And the Quran, like I said when we started with this series, does not present its message in a neat, framed or system of blocks of information. Instead, what it does is it actually has themes, and it drifts from one theme and then flows into a different theme. And the topics that you discern, or the knowledge or the understanding or the meaning, has to be distilled by reading and reflecting. And there's no need, or there's very little need, for a high level of interpretation. The Quran does not require interpretation. The Quran calls itself a plain and clear book. Quran, kitabun mubin. So the word mubin means plain and clear. And so anyone that says that you require high levels of knowledge and understanding, then you are actually, what that person is doing is they are disqualifying you and me from trying to seek meaning and guidance. So what I'm going to do is we're going to deal with these 50 or so verses, I will show you an understanding or a greater understanding or meaning of these 50 verses. Now, these verses do form part of one theme. And what I've done is, the previous theme, I've done a discussion on that theme, and then I've ended where I believe a new theme begins. So these 50 or so verses are a part of one coherent idea that the Quran is trying to convey. And so here we go. I will then first of all share with you the bigger model or the biggest understanding or meaning that I'm deriving from these verses. Normally I would read all the verses, but I think I'll make a separate video on the verses. So I will try and do a separate video. I will read the verses and publish it alongside this discussion. So for now, I'm going to just stick to the English translation of my own, and then maybe put out another video for the Arabic recital. So if you want to like read those 50 verses and just enjoy just looking at the natural original revelation, you can do that. But I will do the meaning that I've derived from it. So okay, just to let you see, let you have an idea of those verses. We start from chapter 3, verse 64, and the first verse that forms part of this series of verses. Now, this is going to be quite a lengthy presentation, so I suggest you, if you just settle in, have a nice comfortable place to sit, put your feet up, have a cup of coffee or tea, and then you follow the presentation here. It's a lot of thinking, a lot of processing of the verses that brings me to this position. So I can tell you now, I mean, it took me maybe I think 3 days 3 days work to get to this point. So you might look at this and you don't have to spend those 3 days. You can just see, all you have to do is use your aql, use your intellect, and observe and see if it's nonsense or see if it makes sense. And that's all you have to do, and you can just allow your rational faculties to be activated when you look at these. Now let me look at the first verse of this, and I'm going to need to contextualize also this particular set of verses. You see, as a background, in the previous reflections discussion session with you, the story of Jesus was raised, and I explained to you that the prophet had settled in a town called Medina. At that time it was called Yathrib. Since that time it became known as Medina. And in this town, the prophet really for the first time encounters a people who are very rigid about a law, a legal system. And what he encounters in Medina is what we would refer to as the Jews, the Talmudic Jews, who are adherents or upholders of the Mosaic law, an ancient law which dates back maybe a few hundred years in terms of the Babylonian Talmud, which captures much of the laws, or the Mosaic law, but also dates back many centuries before, when the ancient biblical prophets had been active in the area, northern Arabia. And so the prophet encounters these ancient people who follow a law, a system of law, for which they have several texts. They have the Torah, which is the original 5 books of the Old Testament, the book of Genesis, of I think Leviticus, Deuteronomy, I'm not sure of all the names, but these are the ancient script, the text, which is partially actually endorsed in the Quran. The Torah is endorsed with qualifications or with reservations. So not the Torah is not given a blanket endorsement in the Quran. It is given a qualified endorsement. But also by that time, the people that the Prophet encounters in Medina do have a massive elaboration on the Torah. So they have the Babylonian Talmud, which by that time had been sort of completed. I think the other Talmud, the rest of the Talmud, was not yet finalized. I'm not an expert on Talmud, but I think I've got it more or less a clue on this that I've mentioned to you now. So now I'm sketching for you the context. So the Prophet is in Medina now. He's gone into exile from his hometown, Mecca or Bakka, and where the ancient mosque is located, or the ancient sanctuary is located, and he is now in Medina. He's encountering a people whom the Quran refers to as the followers of the law, or the Ahlul Kitab, literally in today's language, the people of the book. I'm going to call it the followers. I'm going to refer to them as the followers of the law. There were no bound books. The word kitab in your head and in my head now conjures up an idea of a book, or a book like this, you know. But in those years, we can't imagine that those were the types of books. So what we know from a book, the word kitab, kataba in Arabic means to write, but kutiba or kataba also means to prescribe. So when we say the people of the book, we can also say the people of the law. And I was going to use the term the followers of the law. So here we go. We look at this first verse now, and you've got that context. And the first verse says, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تعالوا إلى كلمة سواء بيننا وبينكم ألا نعبد إلا الله ولا نشرك به شيئا ولا يتخذ بعضنا بعضا أربابا من دون الله فإن تولوا فقولوا اشهدوا بأننا مسلمون. Translation: at the start of this series of 50 verses, it says, it starts out by this, it sets the scene. Declare this. The instruction comes to the Prophet. When the Quran says Qul, it means to the Prophet, declare this, or say this, or announce this. In this case, I have translated it as, declare this. You who follow the law, come, let us agree on terms that are mutually acceptable to us and to you. Let us agree that we worship none but Allah, that we hold none equivalent to Him, and that we do not ascribe mutual lordship to ourselves in spite of Allah. Should they refuse, then declare, I testify that we submit and comply. That's an introduction to the series of 50 verses. Now, like I said, I'm not going to go into each of these verses. I'll make a separate video. But these two verses, this verse really sets the scene of the 50 verses to come. First of all, it identifies the followers of the law. There are people here who have previous experience with a code, with a system of laws, that have a community, that have an established, institutionalized system of belief. And the Quran says to them, you have a lawyer, but obviously, as for the previous discussion, you differ with us on the law. And from our previous discussion, the point of difference that was highlighted in the first part of this chapter was on the position of Jesus. So now the Prophet is instructed, look, we know you differ with us on Jesus. You believe Jesus was not legitimate. You believe that Mary was not a chaste woman. You believe that the whole episode of Jesus Christ, Jesus is not, let alone being legitimate, is not the Christ, or is not the reformer or the rectifier, because that is what a Christos is, or a Masih. A Masih is somebody that rectifies, that fixes, that reforms, that remodulates. And the role of Jesus, as we saw in the previous discussion, was to have remodulated the code, which was in a way which was corrupted by the people of Israel. And so Christ, the Quran is in this verse saying, we know that we have differences on Jesus, we the mu'minin, and we know that you have a position on Jesus, but let's come to common terms. Let us accept that there is none worthy of worship but Allah, and that we hold none equivalent to Him, and that we do not ascribe mutual lordship to ourselves in spite of Allah. So let us not try to make ourselves overlords over you, and neither should you hold yourselves in a position of overlordship over us. The word here says, Allah na'budu illallah wa la nushrika bi shay'a wa la yattakhidha ba'duna ba'dan arbaban. So we will not make you our Lord and Guardian, and we will not make you our Lord and your Lord and Guardian. In spite of Allah, the true Lord and Guardian of us and of you. But if they reject, the verse says, فَإِن تَوَلَّوْا فَقُولُوا اشْهَدُوا بِأَنَّا مُسْلِمُونَ. If they reject, then you say to them, okay, so go in peace, but we will submit. That's the introduction to the series of verses. So let me go back to the original plan, where I will try to present you with a system or a coherent understanding of these verses. I want to title this discussion, What Real Commitment Entails, because I do believe that we are people who have a commitment to the Holy Quran, to the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam, to the Deen, but we kind of don't realize, or we don't formulate a position where we express that commitment in the right way. And so here I'm going to I don't want to use the interpret. We're not interpreting the Quran. We are just merely taking in and learning from the Quran. So let me then proceed. You see, the committed people, those who have true commitment, who serve Allah, serve God Almighty, will have the following components, and these components are all addressed in this the 50 verses. The first component that is addressed constantly, that comes up, is the code. Now the code, another word for the code is al-kitab, the book, the law, the code, the canon, the rule, the what other words can we use? The system, that is the code. And the code, we will expand now on what these verses say about the code. The second component that is essential to this system or the party of Allah are those who endorse the code. So the first component that is dealt with in these 50 verses is the code. The second component that is highlighted and addressed constantly in terms of the code are those who endorse the code. The word is used, the mu'mineen, those who endorse, those who embrace, those who believe, those who admit, those who affirm the code are called the mu'min. The word mu'min means somebody who affirms, endorses, believes in. I don't like the word believe, because believe is not as strong as commit, or are comfortable with it, are secure in it. The word mu'min also means secure, being secure with it. So the code is the code, and then the second component, which this 50 verses deal with, is the mu'mineen, those who are endorsers of the code. Just in general. The third component that these 50 verses deal with are those who deliver the code. They are also dealt with in their own way. Now those who deliver the code are the messengers, the Rusul, the Rasul in Arabic, but who are the messengers or the message carriers who bring the code to the people, who deliver the code, who deliver the message. They could also be the Anbiya, those who come and refresh or revive or re-deliver the message. They could also be the A'imma, those who come and re-implement and reintroduce and refresh the message. You see, so the Imam, the Nabi, the Rasul, these are all people that come and deliver or re-deliver the message. The code, the message and the code, same thing. Then the fourth element that is dealt with in these 50 verses, and that we will identify here from a reading of these verses, is the vanguard. Now, vanguard is a particular unit within a greater crowd or greater group that are in the forefront, that are more energetic, that lead the rest, and that almost like is the energy of the bigger crowd. So these 50 verses also refer to a vanguard, and we will just now look at them also. But then, fifthly, unfortunately, these 50 verses, over and over, it reflects on, it lists, it highlights the detractors, the enemy, the rejectors, the obfuscators, the oppressors, and they are constantly also highlighted in these 50 verses. So those are the 5 components that we have to look at. Now, I'm going to go into each one individually. Like I said, this is going to be a fairly lengthy presentation. Sit back and enjoy. Here's a picture of how I want you to see the bigger picture, which I will go into more detail. So let me just show you here what we have. You see, here we have a graphic interpretation of these 50 verses. And I'm going to go into more detail now, but let me first stand still here and give you a little bit of a picture of what these 50 verses are saying. And believe me, like I said, 2 or 3 days of reading, understanding, looking up for meaning, looking up for this, and doing the research and understanding is what brought me to this understanding here, which is very easy as a conceptual understanding. And this is how the Quran describes the ideal community or the party of Allah. Now, before you get confused, let me take it one at a time. First of all, there's the code. All right? So you have the code, and I'm representing the code with this book. The code is the book. It contains the directives from Almighty Allah, from Almighty God. And that is an ancient book, no doubt about it. Every discovery so far in recent years and decades, the Birmingham manuscript shows that the Quran is the same Quran. The Birmingham manuscript is 1400 years old. So, it dates back to like the time of the Prophet or shortly after him. And those verses, a few verses in there, maybe 10 pages, 20 pages, completely agree with the Holy Quran that we have today. So the code is there. It's the Quran. It's our holy book. It's the one that we commit to. Now, based on that code, we have the institutionalization of the code. Yeah, this house. Now, institutionalization, I represent with a house. Right? The institutionalization of the code I represent with this house. This house is based on the code. And when you institutionalize something, it means you work out a social structure that conforms to the code. So in other words, everything in your community is built and based on the code. So any aspect of the community, whether it is the welfare of the community, the education, the safety of that community, the social affairs, in terms of marriage, in terms of family, in terms of wealth, in terms of economics. It's all structured in accordance with the code. So there is the institutionalization of the code. Let me take an example for you. The concept of usury or interest, riba, is outlawed in the code. The code outlaws it. Right? We have no doubt about that. You know that. Liquor or booze is decried, is decried in the code, is seen as a tool of the devil. The caring of the orphans is highly encouraged, or is impelled or implored. The respect of the elderly is you are implored with that in the code. So what I'm saying is that the values, the principles, the ideals that are contained in the code are institutionalized in the community. It becomes part of the laws of that community. It doesn't become part. The law is created within the framework of the code. Right? So that is what this house means. And it says the institution. Now let's look at inside that house. The foundation is the code. The house is the institutionalization of the code. And inside that house you find three people, 3 character types. The biggest group is the mu'minin, are those who admit to the code, those who confess the code, those who affirm the code, right? Those are the mu'minin. So the mu'minin are those who are secure, who endorse the code, and they are that group. But there are also in this house the leadership, or those who have brought the code, those who are the people who are the defenders or the custodians of the code. Because the code needs a custodian, and the community needs a leader. We'll go more into that. And also the third element that we have in this house is what I call the Vanguard. And I've portrayed the Vanguard as the ultra committed, ultra conscious defenders of the code, defenders of the institution, and defenders of the mu'minin and the leadership. Now do not see here a blind puppet soldier. See these as ultra conscious, ultra committed to the code. You know, the most God-fearing, the most humble, the most loving towards mankind, the most lovers of justice, the most loving of justice are these people here, the Vanguard. Right, so I think you have a picture of what I graphically want to represent the code. If you joined late, we are looking at 50 verses in Surah Ali Imran, and I am portraying or putting these verses into a nice graphic representation. Let's move on. So now that you have that picture in your mind, let me show you the next one. Okay, so you know what is missing here? What is missing from this? You can see what is missing, right? The detractors or the enemy. They're obviously not shown here, so let me move to them. That word didn't come out nice. Oops. Detractors didn't come out nicely. And I'm blocking one here, sorry about that. So I'll move me a bit there. The detractors are those in opposition to the code. Now these 50 verses that I'm going to deal with, they highlight these different components, and they highlight the detractors also. Let me say to you what these verses are saying. But I kind of don't like the way it's come out, but I hope you will bear with me on these words that are cut off. So the detractors are made up of a pool of disenchanted people, of a pool of misfits, degenerates, cowards, and generally troublemakers in society. And the Quran is a very positive book. It's a book of love. It's a book of nature. It's a book of harmony. But it's not a romantic book beyond reason. And it remains a real text that is in touch with reality. The reality is that there are dissenting. In fact, dissent is not the word. There are enemies of good in the world, and the detractors to the code, right? So here's the institution, there's the code. These are the people that are doing their best to bring that house down, and they are made up of partial believers. In other words, the people who want to accept part of the code or the book, but when they see a verse that is not acceptable for them, you know, when they see a verse that they don't like, then they say no, but that's not necessary to follow that. You know, when they see the verse on interest on riba. Then they say, no, but you know what? We're living in a different system now. Riba is okay in our time. So they are partial believers. Then you get those with dual loyalties. They have their job and they have their religion. So which one gets preference? So they give preference to the job or to the business sometimes, and to the religion after hours. That's a person with dual loyalties. Then you get the deserters, those who have deserted the right path because they were lured or they were enticed away from it, and they found, out of fear or out of whatever they get on the other side. Then there are the previous followers of the law, those who are ex-followers of the law, but they are now too arrogant to believe. And in the context of this verse, of these this 50 verses, when the Prophet addresses the distractors, he actually addresses the followers of the ancient law, the Talmudic followers. He actually often the Quran actually refers to them. The other group that form of this, that is part of this pool, this rotten pool, is the brainwashed people who are just purely brainwashed by the elite. Then you get the weaklings or the cowards. They just don't have the guts to stand for what is right because they're afraid of being hurt, being put out of business, being ostracized, getting a bad reputation, and they just become the cowards and they become part of that pool. Then the partial believers, similar to the dual loyalties, but I got them there, so I'm not going to repeat, sorry. And then there's the power mongers, those who are in it for getting benefit. And all of these make up the pool of distractors. Now, you've looked at the institution, at the code, and you see what the distractors look like. Now you have the bigger picture. So then we can proceed and look at all the components now on their own. The first component that I'm going to look at is the code. Now in these verses, and like I said, I will put out a video on the verses on its own, we find that first of all, the code is simple. That is the first, what these verses are saying. Let me take some examples, right? 395. 395. Let's go to 395. Tell them Allah remains true, so follow Abram's way, pure and uncomplicated. Millat Ibrahim Hanifan wa ma kana min al-mushrikeen. Hanifan, pure and uncomplicated. Number 2, 3118 also makes the same point. Let's just look at 3118. Here we go. I need to link it to the verses so that you can see that this is not theories that I'm conjuring up in my mind, but that these are all the understanding that I'm drawing out of the well, the Quran as a well, and I'm drawing the meaning out of the. Here this verse says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la tattakhidhu bitanatan. Hear this, O you made the affirmation of truth, the mu'min. Abstain from forging intimate alliances outside of your own group. These will end up undermining without fail. Their goal is to hurt you. The enmity is apparent from their words and what they hold secret. Our directives are clearly formulated for you if you are willing to apply your minds. قَدْ تَبَيَّنَّا لَكُمُ الْآيَاتِ إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. Our directives are clearly formulated for you if you are willing to apply your minds. What the Quran is saying is that it is simple. It is straightforward. Don't let anyone tell you the code or the book. By the way, I want you to see the code as the book. The code equals the law equals the book equals Al-Quran. It's simple. It's based simply on the supremacy of Allah. And there are the verses that you will find that makes that point. It is in harmony with the universe, 383. Let's just quickly check that one up. It's an interesting one. 383. Sorry about that if I'm flashing your eyes. It is in harmony with the universe. And let's look at this beautiful ayah where we see that it is in harmony with the universe. أَفَغَيْرَ دِينِ اللَّهِ يَبْغُونَ وَلَوْ أَسْلَمَ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ طَوْعًا وَكَرْهًا وَإِلَيْهِ يُرْجَعُونَ أَفَغَيْرَ دِينِ اللَّهِ يَبْغُونَ وَلَوْ أَسْلَمَ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ طَوْعًا وَكَرْهًا وَإِلَيْهِ يُرْجَعُونَ. So you desire any but the life choice from Allah. Deen, life choice, or system of belief, system of operation. Do you desire any but the life choice from Allah? Why? When it is to Him that everything in heaven and on earth submits willingly or unwillingly, and when it all goes back to Him. Based is in harmony with the universe, the code. Is ancient, 384. I want to look at that one also. It's just next one. قُلْ آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ وَمَا أَنزِلَ عَلَيْنَا وَمَا أُنزِلَ عَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَإِسْمَاعِيلَ وَإِسْحَاقَ وَيَعْقُوبَ وَالْأَسْبَاطِ. It says here, tell them to declare, we endorse and acknowledge Allah and what He presented to us, and what He presented to Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac and Jacob and to the clans. Also what was given to Moses and Jesus and the rest of the prophets from their Lord and Sustainer. We draw no distinction between any of them, and we remain fully committed to it, and we fully submit to Him. That beautiful verse there. It is ancient, so the code is ancient. Al-Quran is 1450 years old, but Al-Quran is a check or a control on the previous Torah, on the Injil, and on the messages that came before that. So, but the code, the actual code, the message in the Quran is ancient. The ideas in the Quran is comprised of the directives or ayat. So I'm not going to look at those verses, but the code that we are talking about is comprised of the directives or ayat. Let me just take one then. 362. Let me just take that one quickly. I'll go back. Verily, these are truthful narratives. Inna hadha lahuwal qasasul haq. There exists no God but Allah. Indeed, it is Allah is exalted, one full of wisdom. So the Quran is telling us that these are the narratives. 3108. Let me just take that one also. I want us to to have clarity on this point. 3108. تلك آيات الله نتلوها عليك بالحق وما الله يريد ظلما للعالمين. These then, and the book refers to the verses, the ayats, the narratives, the directives. These then constitute tilka ayatullah. These then constitute the directives of Allah, the ayat of Allah, which we cite for you truthfully, because Allah does not want wickedness for the world. وَمَا اللَّهُ يُرِيدُ ظُلْمًا لِلْعَالَمِينَ. So, I am confirming the point that the message or the code or the law is contained in the ayat of the Quran. It is not contained in other ideas and concepts conjured up by people in ancient times, or added by people, or claimed as part of the code. The code, the holy and timeless part of the code, are the verses in the Quran. Now, I did say to you that you have the institutionalization of the code here, right? Which is not just the verses of the Quran, of course not. The code is the framework. The code is the foundation. There's no traffic laws in the Quran. There's no traffic laws in the Quran. So if you're building a society, you're going to have traffic laws. So I'm not saying that there's nothing else except the Quran. There must be traffic laws. There must be laws for trading, laws for building a house, bylaws and regulations. But they have to fit into the code. You cannot have a traffic law that is based on discrimination, for example, where you say that white people can use the road, but not like in Israel, where they say Jews can use the road, but not non-Jews. That is against the code. So your traffic laws must comply with the code. But it doesn't mean the code is the only laws. There are laws that we could improvise, that we could elaborate, because what we do is we have the primary code, the Holy Quran, the sacred code, the timeless code, the ancient code, the universal code, the cosmic code, which is the Quran. But then you can elaborate rules and regulations from within the framework of that code. So what I want to say is that it is comprised, the sacred code is made up of the directives of Allah, and you cannot incorporate in that sacred code, in that core, man-made rules and laws. Let me give you an example, because I'm going to make this a long video because I want to bring this point home. You cannot say that the code, it is a sacred institution, part of the code, that you should accept the Khulafa Rashidin, the ancient caliphs of the Muslims, the people who succeeded the Prophet. You cannot make that an intimate or part of this core sacred code. It's not in the code. So then you want to try and throw people out of the house of Islam because they don't believe that Abu Bakr or Abu Huraira or Abu Sufyan or Muawiyah were great and pious. I mean, if you have that false belief, you can't impose that. But you can elaborate the code, but you can't elaborate on the sacred core of the code. And that is only vested in the verses. Let's continue with the code. So the code can be elaborated on. It is understood and elaborated via the aql, common sense, intellect, 13118. If you want to read it, you can read it. I'm not going to. Let me just see how far I am from that. Actually not, so I can go there. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la tattakhidhu bitanatan. Our directives are clearly formulated if you are willing to apply your minds. Alright, you get the point there. So the code is understood and is elaborated on via common sense intellect. And I have a session early on where we speak about what is common sense. You know, it is deductive, inductive reasoning, it is proofs from nature, empirical arguments, empirical evidence. So those are all part of common sense intellect. Go and look at those early videos if you would like to know what do we mean by common sense. It's not anything goes. So the code is institutionalized in the form of a state or community. That is, remember that picture I showed you now. It has to be institutionalized. You cannot have the code and treat it like a private affair. Like, for example, what I'm doing here now is part of a process of advancing that code, promoting that code, so that my dream is, my hope is that you who are listening or you are following this, that you will be part of a process of institutionalizing that code. That code will eradicate oppression and evil in the world. That's another aspect of the code that is highlighted in these verses. That code requires ongoing perpetual activism. Don't have the verses quoted there, but I think these are also in other parts of the Quran mentioned. And this code is defended by the Vanguard. I've spoken a lot about the code. I've given you these are the attributes or the features of the code, which is the law, which is the kitab, the book of Allah. The second component that emerges from a reading of these 50 verses is the concept or the idea of an institution, a house of Allah. And it starts, one of the verses, it starts by saying the first house of Allah was established by Abraham at a place called Bakkah. Let's just go to that verse quickly. I want you to see that verse. We're looking at 396. إن أول بيت وضع للناس للذي ببكة مباركا وهدى للعالمين. Now I want you to set aside interpretations and people's tafsir, because I don't believe in the word tafsir. The Quran does not give man the right to tafsir. The Quran is its own tafsir, and tafsir means to interpret, and the Quran does not require interpretation. The Quran is kitabun mubin. When something is mubin, there's no ambiguity. You only interpret when there's ambiguity. The Quran often expresses or regards itself as an unambiguous book. So when you read the Quran without people's influences on you, there are a lot of ideas around this verse. And people imagine that it is building, that there's a couple of rocks that were packed, and that is, no. The simple concept here is, Inna awwala baytin wudi'a linnas lalladhi bi Bakkata. The first, and the word house is an institute. Allah doesn't need, it's absolute nonsense to say that you must build four walls and a roof for Allah for the house of Allah. if you believe that, then you're believing nonsense. Now you're going to say, yeah, but it's not a house for Allah to live in, it's a house of worship. Yes, that I agree with. It's a house of worship. But worshipping is not going there and making movements in the house. You could have done it anyway. You don't need a house for that. The real meaning here is to found an institution. Abraham founded an institution at a place called Bakka, at a sacred place called Bakka. Abraham at that place founded an institution. Now an institution or an institute is a tangible place. It has an address, it has people, it has certain ideas, it has principles, it has objectives, it has goals, it has rules, and that is an institution. It has a constitution, it has a foundation, and that is what Abraham founded at the place called Bakka, is an institute. And what was that point of that institute? Linnas alladhi linnas, for the sake of humanity. Mubarakan wa hudan lil alamin, and for universal guidance. So Abraham founded an institute at a place called Bakka, dedicated to universal guidance, to guiding all people and laying the foundation of the code, of making the code known to all the nations. Let's look at the next verse. فيه آيات بينات مقام إبراهيم. Here again, I want you, please, if you're a Muslim, you come through the madrasa system. Unfortunately, you have been, your mind is colored. Your mind is influenced. You're not reading the Quran as the book should be read, with a clear mind. Things have been placed in your brain so that when you read, you see other ideas. You know, you've been taught that day is night and night is day, and so when it's morning, then you think it's night. No, the verse here says, contained in this house that Abraham founded are the well elucidated directives of the worldview of Abraham. Fi ayatu bayinatun maqamu Ibrahim. Now the Arabic is simple. If you don't read it with the false meanings that men have given to it, then you'll be misguided. If you read it with a sincere mind and not to get, the false things that priests and people have taught you, then you will see. Fihi, in it, ayatun, directives, bayinatun, clear, maqamu Ibrahim, the position, the standpoint, the worldview, Ibrahim. Contained in it, in that house, the well elucidated directives of the worldview of Abram. وَمَنْ دَخَلَهُ, in order that anyone admitted to it would enjoy security. وَمَنْ دَخَلَهُ كَانَ آمِنًا. So anyone who admit to the ayat or the directives contained in the house would enjoy security. You see, I need to link my meaning that I've given you to the actual verse. And we read the verse without being influenced by a Maulana, by some priest that lived 1,000 years ago, by some, employee of an oppressive king. God forbid that we should take our Quran from the mouths of those who serve the oppressors. Because most of the pious frauds that have taught you and me Quran, or not, that have transmitted the Quran, most of them have served the kings and served the emperors and served the oppressor. But here we're reading the Quran with our own eyes directly. I'm not paid by anyone, by the way. I'm not on an agenda here. There's no money in this for me. في آيات بينات مقام إبراهيم ومن دخله كان آمنا. And whoever admitted to it, whoever entered it, this house, where these are the basic foundations, من دخله كان آمنا, were safeguarded, was secure, would enjoy security. وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا. Once again, I'm going to throw you away from the mindset that you have been put in. Please, brothers and sisters, please, if you're not Muslim, if you're just a YouTube person in it up here, I think you'll find this easier than the Muslims. You know, the Hajj is often used, that word is often used in the Quran. It is used as a fair or as a giant, exhibition or a trade fair. You know, the fair. And in ancient Arab times, there was the annual fair. That was the Hajj. It was an annual event. All the Arabs would gather at the holy site, and they would gather there for the annual fair, where they would, for religious purposes and for business purposes, they would come and gather. But the operative word here is Hajj, which is a fair, an exhibition, a promotion. وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حَجُّ الْبَيْتِ. Now I want you to see the meaning here. وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حَجُّ الْبَيْتِ. You know, don't look at that word as a word called pilgrimage. That word pilgrimage that word Hajj doesn't mean. Pilgrimage is an English word. There's no revolutionary meaning in pilgrimage. It's just a whole lot of poor people who come together and do mindless things, and then they go home again. Some of them are trampled to death. Some of them catch diseases. It's a money-making scam. But here the word Hajj fits in with the meaning Hajj in the Quran. I don't have the time to do it now here, but the word Hajj is often used in the Quran to refer to an exhortation or a plea or a invocation, to invoke or to plea or to exhort. That word Hajj is in the Quran. It's often there, where Allah says they yuhajukum, they exhort you, they try to persuade you. But here we say وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حَجُّ الْبَيْتِ مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا. Now we say here, we discover the meaning. For the sake of Allah, it is compulsory on mankind. وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حَجُّ الْبَيْتِ. We have to implore, showcase, invoke, argue for the Bayt of Abraham. Am I taking this too far? Is my meaning running too thin? Am I departing from the meaning of the words? You can be the judge of that. I said to you earlier, you're going to lie back and you're going to look at what I'm saying, and it's up to you to decide whether this is nonsense. Now I'm gonna again pitch this meaning to you, and you reflect and you decide. Allah says here, it is indeed so, inna awwala bayti wudi'a linnas lalladhi bi Bakkata mubarakan wa hudan lil alamin. The first, technically the word bayt means house. The first house founded for the sake of humanity and for universal guidance was the one at the blessed place of Bakkah. Alright, we don't differ on the meaning there. Maybe what we differ on is you could say, yeah, but it's a house. If it's a house, it means it's 4 walls and a roof. I'm saying to you, the word bayt doesn't make sense. Why would Allah need a house? So I'm arguing here that it is an institute. It is a center. It is a headquarters, right? And obviously the word house can be broader. You get the word house, but you also get the word house in a broad sense. The house of Allah, in fact, is not a house. It's an institute. It's an institution. Look at this meaning again. Fi ayatu bainat maqam Ibrahim. In it are the verses, that's a possessive, that word maqam Ibrahim, the station or the point or the stand of Ibrahim, the worldview of Ibrahim is contained in that house. وَمَنْ دَخَلَهُ كَانَ آمِنًا. And whoever entered this house or adopted those directives was safe and was secure. وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ. And then would you see what you will have to convince me with, and which I'm unconvinced with, is that now this house that Abram founded, the way we are going to be safe, or the way we have to deal with that house, is to now go on a pilgrimage there and walk around it and throw a few stones on a brick wall somewhere and do a whole bunch of rituals. I'm not saying you don't have to do that. If you do that, good and well, but you would be you would be taking the life out of the deen. And personally, I would implore you, be very, very careful about not looking for the real meaning here. Because if you do make a mistake, you can, the meaning here that I'm advancing, that I'm saying to you, that I'm offering to you is وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حَجُّ الْبَيْتِ. That it means here, for the sake of God, do you people, mankind, now need to promote and advance this house of Abram, this institution of Abram. You need to promote and invoke the institution of Abram. Man istata'a ilayhi sabilan, on whoever is able to. You must now, when you say that this verse refers solely to the Hajj, the pilgrimage, then you need to explain to me why وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ. Why is it saying on mankind? Because the word nas is used there. And nas, when the Quran speaks about nas, it doesn't say the mu'minin. It doesn't say وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ حِجُّ. Where does it say that? وَعَلَى النَّاسِ. It doesn't say وَعَلَى الْمُسْلِمِينَ or عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. It doesn't say that. It says وَعَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ. It is the Hajj. The Hajj is enjoined on man, on humanity as a whole. Now you have to explain to me why doesn't it say to the Muslim? Because a lot of places in the Quran it says the law is applicable to the Muslim. وَقُلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. It is addressed to the mu'min. Yeah, this is addressed to mankind. So you know what? If you believe that pilgrimage is what this verse refers to, then you must go and you must open Makkah and everywhere to all people of the world. The meaning is that you need to Hajj, you need to showcase, you need to advance, you need to invoke the institute of Ibrahim. Not a pilgrimage where you go and walk in a circle and throw stones and then you go to McDonald's or KFC afterwards and you go in a 5-star hotel and you relax there, but air conditioned. That is all the shaitan's interpretation of this verse. I'm giving you an honest interpretation which is unaffected by the shaitan. Coming back to the institution is the one established by Abram and Pakkah. Dedicated to making a global appeal for the code. That is the institution. Dedicated to formulating and showcasing the divine directives, the ayat. Maintenance compulsory on all able people. Right? That is the institution. That is the second component. Remember we said the first component is the code. The second component is the institutionalization of the code. There we go. Code, and then the institutionalization of the code. The house that Abram built. The building of an institution. Let me tell you something about the institution now. You know, the institution is the state. The institution is the state. It's the republic. It's the institutionalization, the civil, the civitas. It's the metropolis. It is the structuring of society into a formal social structure. That is the institution. So you have the code, which is the book, which is the law, and then you have the institution, which is the state. We are enjoined with establishing the state, or the structure, or the civil society, the social structure. And that structure has got the same objectives that the structure which Abraham built had. And that is to showcase, to implement, to present to the world the code in action, as what Abraham did at Bakka. I'm very faithful to the verses. This is not me sucking things out of my thumb, but this is also not me trying to follow Sheikh this and Sheikh that and Sheikh that wrote books in the past. I've seen those books. You know, if you know me, then you know that I have read the great classics of Islam. I have read Tafsir ibn Kathir, not the whole one. I've read of it. I've read and I've seen Tafsir Tabari. I've read the Tafsir of Qurtubi. I've read Hajar Asqalani. I had their books. All these great sheikhs who read the Quran and tried to interpret it. What you must realize is that these people worked for the government. They worked for the state. They worked for the Umayyads. They worked actually for the Abbasids and for other kings. And today you get the Mus'haf Medina, which is a translation of the Quran, which is authorized by the King of Saudi Arabia. Do you think I'm going to put any value or any importance in something that was validated by the King of Saudi Arabia? No, I will never. I can't. They not. We'll continue now. You'll see why not. So the institution is when those who are in possession of the code establish a structure, a system, a state, a civil society. Let's continue. We come to the next element within the 5 elements which I've identified in these 50 verses. Those who endorse. And I'm going to speak about them for a while now. Those who endorse. Those who endorse are those who embrace the code, those who admit to the code, those who believe the code, those who are secure that the code is authentic and from Almighty God. That is when we say about what that is, those that we refer to as those who endorse. The Quran uses the term mu'min. So the word mu'min means somebody who believes, somebody who accepts, somebody who endorses, somebody who embraces, somebody who is secure. And these 50 verses often refer to the mu'minin, and these are some of the attributes which are ascribed to the believers. Number 1, sacrifice. To give up what you hold dear, 392. The other point made about the mu'min is that they have true legitimacy, historical and in terms of broader, rational coherency. They have legitimacy. They are not sectarian. Come, let me show you a verse here where it says they are not sectarian. And you can do the homework and go and see that my interpretation is not my own. I said to you the mu'min or the believers or the affirmers or the endorsers are not sectarian. And look at this verse, how this verse eloquently makes that point. ما كان إبراهيم يهوديا ولا نصرانيا ولكن كان حنيفا مسلما وما كان من المشركين. Can you see this verse makes the point that the code or the believers or the affirmers or the mu'minin like Ibrahim are not sectarian. It says here, Abraham was neither a Jew nor a Christian. On the contrary, he was in non-sectarian pure submission, never being one with shared loyalties. وَمَا كَانَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. I'm using the term shared loyalties for mushrikeen. Those who are loyal to Allah, to God, and who are loyal to their job and to their boss and to the government and to the holy man and to the Maulana and to the priest. So they've got dual loyalties. God says this, the priest says that. And you try to please both. They have shared loyalties. Abram was neither a Jew nor a Christian. On the contrary, he was in non-sectarian pure submission, never being one with shared loyalties. Coming back to this point then, they are not sectarian. We don't care. The mu'min does not care if you call yourself a Christian, if you call yourself a Shia, if you call yourself a Sunni, if you call yourself a Jew. We are one family. Now this is also, I'm going to rattle some cages here, because what you are believing in your mind, if you're a Muslim here watching, is that you must be Muslim to be part, to advance the code, or to be an endorser. No. You can endorse Allah, you can endorse the Quran, you can endorse the directives of Allah, and you can be a Shia, Sunni, anything. There's no sectarianism. These are names that people invented. Wallahi. These are names that people invented. The word Sunni is a name that people made up. The word Shia is a name that people made up. It is used in the Quran, but wallahi, that is not a name the Quran uses for people who believe in A, B, C, D of Shiism. It's not the word Shia is used in another sense. So sectarianism is absolutely not part of those who are the mu'minin. We, or the mu'min, and may Allah count me amongst them, we are sincere about our desire to implement the directives of God and to do good on earth. The next feature of those who endorse the mu'min is that they accept the entire code. The next point that is raised in terms of the believers is the need for an institute. And then the next point made about the believers or the endorsers, our salvation lies in remaining faithful. More points about those who endorse: worship and adore Allah without compromise, should find unity in mutual fraternity and in Allah's instructions. Another point about them is they are restrained and mindful always. Another point is they establish a vanguard core of ultra-conscious and ultra-committed individuals. Another point about them made in these verses: they do not trust with their security those on the outside. Another point is they will vouch for truth no matter the cost. Can we look at that verse quickly? Because that I would really like to see what that verse entails. They will, no matter the cost. فَمَنْ حَاجَّكَ, is the word hajj again? Hajj. It means who argues with you. Anyone who argues with you now after clear knowledge was revealed to you, say to them, come, let us call our and your sons, and our and your women, and ourselves and yourselves, and let us make an earnest prayer and invoke the curse of Allah on whoever is the liar. Just think about this now. What are we saying here? You know, the Quran is saying to you as believers that you must be prepared to be all in for the truth. Even to the point of saying that I invoke the curse of Allah on me if I'm a liar. You are all in for the truth. And that is what we mean here when we say that they will vouch for truth no matter the cost. So they will vouch for truth no matter the cost. They can hail from any religious background. Once again, the point that I made earlier about sectarianism. We don't care about your labels. We don't care about your skin color. We don't care about your ethnicity. You back the code, you are part of the brotherhood. Okay, so I've covered now the code, I've covered the institution, and I've covered those who endorse. Let me go back to the graphic here. So I've spoken about the code, it's the verses. I've spoken about the institution, it's the state, right? It's the infrastructure, it's creating a house, an institution where the code is implemented, whether it's a village, whether it's a city-state, like Medina was when the Prophet settled in Medina. He implemented the code for a state, for a city, or whether it's an empire or a state or a huge tract of land. The code has to be followed by the institution. And then we looked at the mu'mineen, at their features, right? Now we go to the next level. The leadership. Those who are the custodians of the code. Those who ensure that the code is delivered or recited or cited. First of all, these verses state that the leadership forms part of the greater covenant. Let's look at that verse 381. That the leadership form part of the greater covenant. It says here, وَإِذَا أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِيثَاقَ النَّبِيِّينَ لَمَا آتَيْتُكُم مِّن كِتَابٍ وَحِكْمَةٍ ثُمَّ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مُصَدِّقٌ لِمَا مَعَكُمْ. That's just my translation. وَإِذْ أَخَذَ, to make the text flow. Long ago Allah made the pledge of the prophets. When I present you with law and sound judgment, then a messenger emerges from amongst you, affirming what you were presented with. You shall endorse him and support him. He confirmed with him, do you agree to solemnly abide by this? They replied, we do agree. He then replied, so do bear witness to this, as will I too be a witness to this pledge. Sorry about that. The leadership in the code, in the book, in these verses, clearly, there's no doubt, it identifies a class of believers or a certain category of humanity that is saddled with the custodianship of the code. They get the book. By whatever way. In the case of the Prophet Muhammad, the book was revealed to him through a mysterious connection with the unseen world by the Spirit, Gabriel, who is referred to in the Quran as the Ruh of Allah, or the Spirit, which has access to the consciousness of certain people. Gabriel came and transmitted the book to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the form of wahi, revelation. That's one way. Rasul, he's a Rasul. The message is transmitted from Gabriel to him, and it enters his consciousness, and there it resides in his consciousness, in his mind, and from there it is codified and written out by people and transmitted in physical form, as we have here millions of Qurans today. So that is one way in which the code arrives on the scene. But there are other ways in which the code can arrive. For example, if you look at the Prophet Aaron, Harun, Musa received the message or the code, but Harun became a custodian of the code. Do you understand? So that's a Rasul, then you get a Nabi, and then you get the A'imma, or the legitimate leaders of humanity, who don't get wahi, they don't get divine updates, but they are just, they are committed to the code, and they are in possession of an existing revelation like the Quran. So there we can count the A'imma, the holy men that succeeded the Prophet, Imam Ali, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, Imam Zainul Abidin. But I don't want to confine it to the 12 Imams, because unfortunately, I'm going to hurt some people's feelings. I'm not of those who believe that there can be 12 Imams. I'm not an Ithna Ashari. How can there be 12 Imams when the world is thousands of years old? I mean, there were Imams before the Prophet. How can we say that there were no Imams before the Prophet? Certainly they must also count. Certainly there had to be Imams after Musa. Right? And what about the centuries after the final Imam, Hassan al-Askari, passed away? Where are those Imams? I believe that if you say that there's no Imamat after Hassan al-Askari, then you are leaving the world without the possibility of forming an Islamic order or an institutionalized system. So I'm much more advanced the notion of the Zaydiyah or the Houthi in Yemen, the Qaysaniya, that understand that imamat or leadership or the role of custodianship in terms of the code is a continuous responsibility on mankind that has to stretch across the length of time. Not only that, but it has to stretch across the breadth and length of the earth. So I'm of those who believe that in America an imam can emerge who is a righteous leader, becomes a custodian of the Quran, does not join the ranks of the oppressor of the state, does not become a demigod in his own right. And I will continue now, you'll see the other points there. A righteous imam can emerge in America, can emerge in Europe, but also can emerge globally. And that is where the idea of the Mahdi comes in, is that there could be divine or divinely sanctioned leadership. I don't want to call it divine leadership, I call it divinely sanctioned imamat or leadership that can be global. And in fact, we should believe that we are working towards a point where there will be a globally sanctioned leadership in place. And then when we believe that, we believe in the concept of the Mahdi. That the Mahdi is a globally sanctioned leader, is an imam with global relevance and legitimacy and acknowledgement. So there's the covenant. We accept the covenant. Leaders are gifted with knowledge and sound judgment. That's in verse 379. They must call people to be devoted to Allah and not themselves. We are talking about the 50 verses in Surah Ali Imran. I'm identifying the different components that are highlighted in these 50 verses. And I'm here, the one component, the leadership covenant, I'm highlighting that they must call people to be devoted to Allah and not themselves. Any leader that pops up in Iran, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, America, Africa, wherever, and they become a charismatic figurehead, a demigod, and they put the focus and the spotlight on themselves and not on the code, they've lost the way, they've lost the plot. Let me show you the verse that says that, 79. Listen to this. Remember, what I'm saying to you is, they must call people to be devoted to Allah and not themselves. Let me show you that. ما كان لبشر أن يؤتيه الله الكتاب والحكمة والحكم. It is not fitting for a mortal man to be given the book, sound judgment, and prophethood, then for such a man to tell people to serve himself, apart from Allah. On the contrary, you should be devotees of your real Lord as a result of teaching and learning the law. بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَدْرُسُونَ. I'm linking everything I'm presenting to you to the verses. And here I'm saying they must call people to be devoted to Allah, not to themselves. If you see Farrakhan or Mufti Menk or any other person who's regarded as a leader become a celebrity, become a figurehead, and the spotlight shifts to them instead of to the code, to the principles, to the ideas that are sacred, then they've lost the way. Keep that in mind. Also, we continue with the leadership and the covenant. will not call people to be devoted to angels or prophets. Any person that comes to you and tell you that you must believe in this angel and that angel will help you, or this prophet and that prophet, like for example the Apostle Paul, where he gets disqualified is in this verse 380. Let me show you. Apostle Paul, great character in the Christian religion, in the founding of the Christian religion, but unfortunately disqualified by this verse. وَلَا يَأْمُرَكُمْ أَن تَتَّخِذُوا الْمَلَائِكَةَ وَالنَّبِيِّينَ أَرْبَابًا. The moment a leader comes and tries to convince you to adopt angels and prophets as your guardian Lord, as God, or as some divinely powerful being, they've lost the plot. That's where the Apostle Paul loses my vote. And not my vote personally, but my vote in terms of my adherence to the code. They guide towards the full implementation of the code, not partial. They don't highlight some verses of the Quran and other verses they try to ignore. In return, the believers, now here comes another point made in reference to the leadership covenant. Very, very important point. When they abide by these things, right? When they do all of this, when they observe the covenant, when they avoid portraying themselves as the figurehead or the demigod, when they don't try to become a celebrity in their own right, when they are endowed with knowledge and with wisdom and bravery, then in return the believers are instructed to endorse and support them. Very, very importantly, you do not have a choice in the matter. If you are living in a society and there is somebody that is arriving with a message, that is defending and advancing that message, that is confronting the oppressor, that is defending the oppressed, that is an assister or a supporter of the weak, you have no choice in the matter if you are a believer, if you are a mu'min, but to endorse and support them. Let's look at the verse 381. Long ago Allah made the pledge of the prophets, and then let me continue. Do you agree to solemnly abide by this? They replied, here we go. When I present you with law and sound judgment, then a messenger emerges from amongst you, affirming what you were presented with. You shall endorse him and support him. Now look at the words here. You shall endorse him and support him. قال وحكمة ثم جاءكم رسول مصدقا لما معكم لتؤمنن به وَلَتَنْصُرُنَّهُ. This is very powerful language. When you say وَلِتُؤْمِنُوا بِهِ, then you just say then you will endorse him. وَلَتَنْصُرُنَّهُ, without the extra emphasis on it, it means you shall support him. You shall endorse him and support him. But here it is the nun mu'akkad, the nun of emphasis. لَتُؤْمِنُنَّ بِهِ. You must, you are compelled to endorse this leader and to support him. Take note of that. If you are a believer, you don't have an escape from that. And then another point in terms of the leadership is that they must establish an institutionalized order. There's no leader that can run around preaching, talking, titillating, writing books without attempting to establish an actual state or an actual fraternity, an actual order. Let's look at the verse here, 396, to bear out that point. The leader must establish an order. Look at this. Okay, here we go. Inna awala baitin, that is the order established by Abraham as a proof. Must establish an institutionalized order. Okay, we're moving on. We're moving on to the second last item now. Let me just show you the graphic again. You have the code, I spoke about that. You have the institutionalized order, which is the state. I spoke about that. The first institution, the first state founded was the one of Abraham at a place called Bakka. Bakka was the first Islamic state or institution of which Abraham founded. And you have the mu'minin, those who are the committed acceptors of the code. You have the leadership, which I said to you has got certain qualities. We move now to what I identify in these verses as a vanguard. There is a vanguard. There is somewhere between the mu'min and the leadership. There's a vanguard, and my understanding is that the vanguard is an ultra committed and an ultra conscious subsection of the mu'minin. There's nothing wrong with being an average mu'min. I'm an average mu'min. I'm committed to the code. I believe the code in its entirety. I've tried to give vent to it or give expression to it in my life. So I'm a mu'min. Inshallah, I will be judged as being a mu'min. I try to shun the things that is shunned in the book, to implement the things that are called for in the book. But there's a particular mu'min that is almost like extra committed, extra conscious, and that is the other. That is what we want to talk about here. The vanguard. The vanguard. An elite formation from the ranks of the believers. Ultra conscious and ultra committed. Prepared to enforce the code. Prepared to defend the code. Prepared to confront evil. Now let me show you the verse. I didn't have a chance to actually get the exact citation there, but let me see if I can find it. وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ. Here we go. كُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ. This is one of the two that refers to the vanguard. The most excellent formation that can emerge for humanity's benefit is one that demands common decency and combats evil while acknowledging Allah. Had the followers of the law affirmed truth, they would have enjoyed excellence, but sadly, though some of them affirm truth, while the majority of them are transgressors. Let me see, there's another one. وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ. get to it. Let me just quickly proceed. There's another verse which says, وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ. I'm not Hafiz. I don't want to take a chance, so I will. Let's just continue. Yeah, I'll get back to that. So they are prepared to confront evil, and then we have to now look at the final of these groups that we were talking about. You have the institution, and then you have the detractors. The enemy, and these verses speak about the enemy also. They identify the enemy and his tactics. And it says here, firstly, they know what the truth is. So don't make the mistake of thinking your enemy is ignorant. Your enemy knows the truth. The elite in the world today, and I want to remind you, I didn't say this yet during this session, but I'm going to say it again. That we don't study the Quran for historical enrichment or to understand history. We study the Quran with one eye in the book and one eye in the world. So we look at the world and we try to shape the world in accordance with a code. And when I read about the detractors or the enemies of truth, I don't look at historical people that lived in the time of the Prophet. Yes, in these verses, the detractors are the Talmudic Jews. Not all of them, some of them, not all of them. Let me make that point clear. Some of them. But the Quran has relevance for all times. And so the detractors of our time are the banksters, are the warmongers, are the injection junkies that want to needle you and inject you with their snake oil concoctions, are the false priests, are the imposters in government, the greedy thieves that are running the governments. Did I mention the banksters? Are the drug peddlers, whether the drugs are legal or illegal in their law? These are all the detractors, and they know what the truth is. When these people tell you not to take ivermectin, it's not as if they don't know that it is helping you. They know it's going to help you. They need to sell you the $100 billion vaccine. They claim legitimacy. They actually claim that they are legitimate. They make a partial endorsement of truth. So you know what? Sometimes they will say the right thing. So don't be fooled by them. They don't lie everything they say. They sometimes say what is right. Now you can't go out like a fool say, because the the president of Egypt said he made salah, so he's a good man. No, you can't judge them on a partial endorsement of the truth. We don't accept partial endorsements of the truth. You are in it for all. You can't justify some of the truth and the rest you want to delegitimize. They obfuscate, corrupt, deceive, and undermine. All those verses say that. They are filled with disdain and hate the people. They don't like people. They don't love people. They hate people. They have disdain for people. They don't care if people die. They will send people to war without flinching, without feeling anything. They will see millions of people die and it doesn't affect them. They will see millions of people in addiction, whether it's gambling addiction, whether it's alcohol addiction, whether it's drug addiction. They are psychopathic. So they have disdain and they have absolutely no love for the people. They have no future. Let me show you a beautiful verse here where it says that, 319. Because there are some fools, that run around thinking that they love you, they are good people, the president is a good man, the king is a good man. Ha antum ulai tuhibbunahum. You are here loving them while they have no love for you. You embrace the law in its entirety while they claim to embrace it, but physically rage against it when they are away from you. Isn't that beautiful? So they make a partial. Don't judge them by saying one right thing, because tomorrow they're going to oppose you on something else. They're filled with disdain. They have no, and then this verse says they have no future actually. Their future is doomed. More points that these 50 verses make about the detractors is that their main weapon is slander and propaganda. They use assassination. They do kill the leaders. Their wealth and power are futile. They survive only because enough people offer them shelter. They survive because Allah gives them temporary respite in those verses. They should be shunned by the mu'min. You should not get into bed with them. If you're a mu'min, you cannot be in bed with the oppressor. They do not respect other people's rights. 375, you'll find that there. It is so amazing for me that there's a gentleman that I don't agree with all the time. His name is Sam Gerrans, I think. He has a YouTube channel. And he's written a letter, registered post on his website. You can find it, Quranic.com. And he's written a letter to 900 of the elite of the world. He's got their names and he's got their addresses. And they include really the 900 members of the elite. He's actually gone through the trouble of putting a letter in an envelope containing some of the verses of the Holy Quran. He's addressed it to them and he's mailed it to them via registered mail. And on his website he has shown a copy of every letter and the receipt from the registered post. Isn't that amazing? The detractors, the enemies of truth they're not fictitious people in the Quran. They're not historical people. They are living, breathing people today, and they are the masters of all the misery that is in the world. And the Quran identifies them and warns us about them. Finally, in conclusion, these verses, the 50 verses that I've drawn out the meaning for you, speak about the known threats that face the mu'minin. And because I've experienced this myself, I would like to make a special effort to show them to you. The first known threat is deviation or subversion. To dilute the message, to change the message, to corrupt the message is the first great threat. Number two is the loss of commitment. When the Prophet fought against the enemies, against the elite, they were ultra committed and ultra conscious. When Sayyidina Ali fought against them, they were ultra committed and ultra conscious. By the time Imam Hussein came on the scene, the Muslims had lost their commitment and their consciousness. And they lost everything. And they became the enemies of Hussein. The other threat is split loyalties. My job, my boss, my priest, and the code. Which one do I choose? Desertion. I get lured away. Internal discord. Controversies over nonsense. There's a war. At one stage there was a war raging about whether the bread is halal. And the Quran is very clear that pork is haram. Pork. is haram. Dead carcass meat is haram. Blood is haram. Anything that is dangerous and that will kill you is haram. Besides that, everything else is halal. Or anything that is slaughtered in a ritual sacrifice where the meat is dedicated to any other except God Almighty, that is haram. So stop arguing about whether the meat, that the chickens and the meat and all that is haram, and go to war about nonsense. And then and then there's also the false leadership. Be careful of that, because that's also a threat to endorse people with flowery speeches as your leaders. If they are not confronting the enemy, if they are not ultra conscious, if they are not sacrificing or putting themselves at risk, if they are not defending right and true and what is just, they are not your leaders. They are your enemies, and they will sell you out. Then, there's another verse. The consequences are listed in many verses, and generally the consequences are often stated as in the hereafter and on earth, and then the reward of the faithful. So I will conclude on that point and take you back to the purpose of this talk was to look at these verses from the Holy Quran, to draw out some meaning for you, to do the hard work that saves you the time, and to summarize those verses. And by means of summary, what those verses tell is a story of 5 elements that make up the ideal society. It is the code, which is the Quran. It is the institutionalization of the Quran, which is the Quranic state or community. It is the leadership who operate in accordance with the covenant. In other words, they advance the code and not themselves. Number 4, it is the dedicated, committed people who embrace the code, the mu'mineen. And 5thly, the vanguard, who are at the forefront of defending the code, advancing what is true, confronting the enemy. And then also what comes out in these verses are the detractors and what they are up to, what are their tactics, and how they will try to undermine the code. So let me conclude on that note. I will try and put out a video that is just a recital of those verses. So don't rest after looking at this. Go then and watch the video that I will be making and see if what I've advanced to you aligns with the actual reading of the verses. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.